We're in the TechCrunch studio today with David Sze, partner at Greylock Partners. David, welcome to the studio.
Hey, Samuel. Thanks for having me in.
So this is going to be a little bit different of a discussion, given that you've been around the Valley for a long time and had a lot of great experiences. And I think it would be awesome to just sort of unpack like how you came to the Valley and kind of what you did before joining Greylock.
Sure.
And once Greylock's, once your Greylock tenure started, and then maybe roll into a little bit of advice for people who are thinking about, either coming to the Valley or interested in VC in their career, right? Maybe just graduating college or graduate school. But tell us a little bit about when you came to the Valley and sort of what brought you out here. What was like the base motivation to come out?
Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast, went to undergrad at the East Coast, and had done sort of a very traditional path of management consulting, which was pretty common in the early 90s, late 80s, actually the late 80s.
When you went out of undergrad right into consulting?
Yeah, and so did that in New York for a while, and got, I think I learned a lot in terms of thinking about strategy and some of the kind of classic block and tackle kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you got exposed to things that were really interesting senior level problems around running businesses or products. But at the end of the day, you were pushing paper, and that just isn't that interesting to me. And so I'd always been interested in technology and media and consumers, and felt like coming out to Stanford and being on the West Coast would be a great thing. That was a lot was going on there. So I ended up at Stanford Business School, and then sort of immersed myself in technology and consumer and media, the three things I cared about. And when I graduated, I ended up taking a very junior job at Electronic Arts. And it was, much to the chagrin of my parents, this sort of transition of going from, going into business school into a lot of debt, and then taking a job that paid dramatically less than the job I had before I went in seemed a little odd. But I just really loved sort of technology and the way it interacted with consumers.
What was the role at EA? Like, what were you doing?
I was an associate product manager.
Yeah.
So, it was pretty junior.
And that was your first PM job?
Yeah, that was my first PM job. And, at that time, the classic career path at a games company was to go and be a tester and work your way up to working with the development teams. And so I was kind of this odd fish for them coming out of business school, but I just knew I wanted to do something in technology and something I was passionate about, and not sort of follow a standard sort of path, and they liked that. So they had me as an assistant or associate product manager, I don't actually remember which one now, and did that for a while working on the games. And I kind of realized in that industry, product management's just a very different thing. It's more akin to the movie industry, where if you're a producer or director or a developer of movies, that was where the action was. And then the product management side, you couldn't tell me who was the head of marketing for Avatar, right? It just doesn't really matter as much. And so I ended up moving to the development side and joined a company called Crystal Dynamics, which in the first 32-bit systems, the days of the 3DO and the Dreamcast, and just after the Sega Genesis CD system came out, that was a lot of change in the industry. And the company I went to was built to sort of try to be the software play as that hardware changed. And so it was a really interesting time, and it allowed me to move to the development side. Ended up working as a producer, developing products, running teams of engineers and artists / designers, and then game designers.
Great. So tell us a little bit about this transition from sort of you never were a PM before,
right?
Then you were a PM, and now you're working more on the development side and sort of managing a larger process.
Right.
Did you feel like you were just kind of jumping into it, or did you feel like you were accumulating knowledge along the way, or did you want to go in that path, or were you just kind of thrust into that path?
I always loved the development side. I always loved the creation of product and working with the teams. And it was pretty natural. I learned each time. Every time you got thrown a little in the deep end, and then learned quickly. And it's like what everyone does in their career: find good mentors, learn and do, and prove that you're good at it, and then take on a new task.
Yeah.
And in fact, usually the problem people have isn't that they're too challenged or interested. It's usually they get kind of bored, and I never had that problem. I kept always finding things to do, and so had done that for a number of years. And then really what happened was that the internet happened. Then Mosaic appeared on the scene in the very, very early days of the internet. So we're talking sort of 94, 95 kind of time frame. That just seemed like an incredible change, and it had a lot of aspects of both the creative nature that I loved in video games and consumer media, but also the importance of data and fast turnaround information and strategy. And so that seemed like a really exciting place to be.
Yeah.
And there's so much change that was going to happen.
Yeah.
So I ended up joining Excite.com, one of the early search engines called Architects at the time. It was about 30 people or so.
Oh, wow.
I was brought on as the first person to lead product for the business to consumer, so the search engine. We consider them what we think of as consumer search engines. They'd previously been actually like a business search engine, like a Nexus Lexus for the internet. And this Yahoo had just launched, and it was looking like, oh wow, that consumer side looks pretty interesting. And everyone was running around looking for someone to be their first person to run product. And I remember no one knew what a consumer web person looked like. So I was interviewing with a magazine editor for my job, was also being looked at.
Wow.
And talked to the finalists were a magazine editor, a TV editor, and I think a newspaper editor. So they had this idea that it was media, and like, we're the Valley and we don't understand media, and so we have to go find these things. And eventually they looked at my background and thought, well, games is a pretty good analogy and has a lot of those aspects. And so I joined, it was about 30 people, and sort of was in charge of the product pretty much from there to the merger with At Home in 99, 2000.
So you were there about 5 years?
Yeah, 4.5, like that.
Yeah. And did it feel like 10, given all the different roles you had there? I mean, it seemed like you did a lot of stuff. It seemed like that was the step, right?
It was definitely, yeah, well, it was, you know, it was a small company where I joined, and then all of a sudden took off, and, you know, it was, you're right, 4.5 years, but in sort of dog years, it was a lot more than that, and everything was, you know, everyone was going as fast as they could, learning. There had been no precedence for what was going on, so, you know, any hypothesis had some potential to be right, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and you also had people, young people that were, including myself, that were moving really quickly as the thing grew. I joined and it was 30 people. I left 4.5 years later and it was, I think, 6,000.
Wow.
And so huge amounts of change, and you learn just incredible amounts.
And what kind of different roles did you have there?
So I started as director of marketing, and then I was the general manager of Excite.com, and then I ran all of product and network programming, and then was SVP of product strategy by the end. So it was all, you know, in some sense, if you step back, it was the same job. It just got bigger, stranger, larger, you know, and it was, by the end I was managing 350 people. When I joined, I was managing myself, basically. Wow. And that was hard enough.
Wow, so, that sounds like a crazy ride.
Yeah, it was, you know, and I think it's, you see, you know, great successes, you see the stresses, you see, you know, some of the mistakes that were made, and those have all been helpful. Sort of.
What was startup life back then, like back then?
You know, I think it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
You know, I think the same kind of commitment, the crazy passion, you know, just working with great people on things that they really loved. Sort of the madness and energy.
Yeah.
You know, your cubes were the innovation of how you were seated. That would be one difference. And now with the sort of open seating plan, that's so different.
Okay.
So it was back in those days. But it was a lot the same, I think.
Yeah.
A lot.
And was that energy more in the Valley or distributed across the Bay Area, or did
it
you
was
feel
more
like
in the Valley then?
Yeah.
You know, and then I mean, by the end of the '90s, it had just exploded. It was kind of everywhere in kind of a crazy way.
Yeah.
But it was the Valley was heavily like that. But soon, .com mania had taken over, right?
Yeah. And anything you noticed either in the hyper growth of that company or through the acquisition that impressed upon you, you know, years later, as you look at other
tons.
Yeah.
Tons of things. You know, good, bad, and ugly sort of stuff.
Sure.
So, you know, there certainly was a lot of learning about how acquisitions are done under pressure, you know, and the kind of mistakes that can be made or the assumptions that are made by both sides. And we saw that in the Excite at Home merger. A big thing about cultures, those were very different cultures. Excite was a very bottoms-up, scrappy, you know, keep running as hard as you can on the treadmill and, you know, be really critical and think about the next thing you can do great. And at Home had always been built from the top down with John Doerr and the cable companies sort of building it up from there and deeming that it would work kind of thing. And so it had a very much more sort of a tops down, it still looked really smart people, really aggressive,
Of course.
but was sort of had been, you know, deemed from the top down to be this thing.
Different DNA, basically.
Totally different DNA.
Yeah.
And so that's always stuck with me. And then, the experience, interestingly enough, the experience with Excite and the search engines actually caused me to invest in Pandora. And so there was a lesson from that too, which is an unusual, like, whoa, Pandora and Excite, how does that work?
I wasn't going to think of that transition, but you got to tell us, what was the insight there?
Yeah, so, and again, this is just an example of over time you pick up learnings, and I think the most successful people in the Valley are, and I see this, you and I in our conversations, you certainly are like this, which is a constant learner. You're always trying to learn and put a perspective on stuff, because fundamentally what we do is hugely unpredictable, right? It's hugely uncertain. And so if you can look at the patterns and look at those, and have the humility to know when it works or doesn't work, or why it might not be the same thing this time, I think that helps a lot, even if it just gives you a slightly better predictive success in a lot of chaos. And so, for example, one of those examples where, and it's an odd analogy, you had, I remember, being one of the 6 or 7 search engines when I first joined Excite. We were probably the number 5 out of 7 search engine.
Wow.
We fought our way up to get to be sort of number 2 to Yahoo, and then the world changed, and AOL and Microsoft came in, and so you had Yahoo, AOL, and Microsoft, and then us, and then the rest. And so it got very hard, and that was partially why we looked and said, look, it's probably time to merge with someone and get an unfair advantage in the next phase of all of this. But I remember watching the search engines at that time. That was right when everyone had decided that search was just not a good business, that no one would make any money. Search engines were going out of business. VCs were like, no way am I going to fund anything that looks like search. And there was Google that had been the sort of last man funded, and they just kept innovating. To their credit, they focused on search and they made it great. And they kept innovating. And just at that moment, when people thought it was the worst business, was when the company that's proven it's the single best business that everyone's jealous of today was happening. And so the same thing was true of Pandora. Pandora, like, all the music companies were going out of business. If you remember, there was this like capitulation moment when iMeme and a whole bunch of other folks went out of business, and they'd been holding on, and there was just, oh my God, there's all these music companies, none of them make any money, there's not going to be a good company in here, and the whole tide turned. And meanwhile, Pandora was, it was losing significant money at that time, so it wasn't like it was a slam dunk. It wasn't like people were highly irrational. But, when you looked at it, you were like, wow, this is a really great brand. And it's really growing with its users. And if the other ones all go away and drop the noise, it's going to be the default choice, which
so
it
were
already
you like
was.
big into music or something, or had you been a user? Or
Yeah, I've been a user over the years, and like I like music, but I don't know that was the fundamental observation.
Or was it something about meeting the founders?
Oh, love the founders, right? I just think, certainly something in this business I tell everyone is, if you don't love, and by the way, it's reflective to the founders, if you don't love the journey you're on, which by definition the founders do, but I think as an investor, you have to love that journey and want to be on that journey. And then if you don't love the people you go on it with, all the rest is like, you can't really control. And, and what I can guarantee is even the best ones, there's crazy ups and downs. And so if you love it and you love the people.
But I remember a couple of years ago when Pandora hit a point where people knew it was getting ready to go public and everything had settled, right? And there had been years of sort of uncertainty around it. This is kind of a tangent, but I think it's interesting. When the initial investors must have made that bet, or reading that New York Times article, right? And sort of looking back, it looked crazy. Like everything about that company seemed absolutely nuts.
Yep, it was a scary time. But I mean, the other fact is, every one of the companies that I've invested in, that's done well, at the time you invested in them, someone was like, that was crazy. And then afterwards, they're like, oh, well, he just did the obvious ones. And that's true of anyone I think you find in this valley when they're successful. If you really remember to the time, there was a little bit of crazy in that decision. Otherwise, there's way too many people focused on things in the valley not to have had it be, done and done silly. So, I mean, that was the equivalent. That was the one for Pandora. Was at that time, everyone believed music couldn't work. They were losing significant amounts of money. There was pressure around the licensing boards about whether their rates would change dramatically, and you had to sort of perceive. And again, this analogy to what happened with Google and search. If you stay focused on your knitting, you build the brand, you get the distribution through that, and the other people fade. You can turn that around. I knew it scaled.
So it's kind of like being like the Paul Graham essay, being a cockroach, right? You just kind of. You never die. Right,
that's right. And so that for them was the survival and focus, and then knowing when the industry changed. But if you don't love the people, it's really not worth it. There's way too much tough times, way too many tough times even in the best companies.
Totally. So I want to back up a little bit. Two things. One is, right at the time where you and your colleagues engineered, or sort of merged with At Home from Excite. At that point in your career, you seem to have gone against the grain of what some Valley memes are now, right? You had an MBA,
right?
You were a consultant,
Yep.
and you were the senior vice president of strategy.
Yeah.
I feel like when I talk to people in startups around here, don't like MBAs
Right
now, or
yeah.
that's the meme,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Don't want people working on strategy, or they view that as soft, or the other side of operational.
Fair enough.
Right? And you know, consultants, it's like we don't want a consultant around,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to build within.
Yeah.
So how is it that you actually emerged with all of those skills into those areas, even before you got into VC?
Yeah, I think I think the model has changed somewhat, right?
Okay.
And so, and rightly so, the model has certainly moved towards a deeper reliance on technical skills.
Yeah.
But I think even then, if you look inside the companies, if you were to really look at who are the leaders after they get to a certain level, or even in the mid stages, you'll find a lot of people that somewhere inside there maybe had an MBA, or even with an engineering degree, undergrad, or were involved in consulting because it's a great training ground at some point. But it's less and less. So I think that has definitely shifted.
Yeah.
But I do think those skills are really useful. I mean, the value of understanding how businesses work and thinking about them in strategy. Now, the title at Excite was really, by then I was running all the product.
I'm sure you're
and
doing
so I'd
a lot
all
of
come up
different
product. So I do
things.
think that going up through product and working with the development and understanding the core needs of the user is something that, if you look at every partner at Greylock now, they've all had at least 10 years experience doing that in an operating role in product in those domains. Yeah. And we just think that brings the right perspective. And it's a little related to something you and I have talked about, which is, so how do you make these calls, right? Well, what allows you to make the tough calls? So if you start, there's a couple observations we found is when we look at our deals, if our group hates it, if everyone hates the deal, it's probably not a great deal. Like that tends to be pretty predictive.
Okay.
If everyone loves it, actually, that's actually not the best result. The best result actually comes from where there is a strong advocate and a set of domain experts that are pushing for it, and there actually is a fair amount of confusion and unclarity around in other groups. And so the ones that have that dynamic where there's strong believers and at least one of the domain folks are very strong at it, and yet there's a lot of concern, those actually end up being the best. And so we've thought about, one, we've changed our process to make sure that that dynamic comes out.
Right.
And two, we've thought about, well, why is that the case? And the truth is, like, if everyone loves it in our group, given the spread and all the experience, it's probably too easy. It's probably actually a nice idea, but is going to be done by a bunch of people, or is too simple and obvious a thing, and it's a small business, not a big business. But yet, when there's certain people in the domain that are understanding why this could really break through, but it's always controversial, which, all our investments that have been great were controversial at the time, right? In some way, shape, or form, that's usually a better indicator.
Actually, Andy Weissman from Union Square had a great quote about this, and he said, kind of in passing, we like it when people smartly agitate us. Right? And he said that, sometimes they'll debate an entrepreneur and investment over 3 months and actually get into battles over it.
Yeah.
And sort of that's what it takes to kind of fight at the later stage investment level, right? To get people over the edge.
Yeah. Well, and I think so much about startups building, helping build, is contrary. You need to be able to let go of logics that are the natural sort of states of human beings. Like, human beings want simple black and white answers. They want safety. They want consensus. All these kind of things, right? And so we're all built to sort of want that. And you have to be, if you're really going to be great in startups, you have to let go of those things, right? You have to let go of the fact that there won't be consensus in your best deals necessarily. Yeah. Right? You have to be okay with that.
So you're saying even when you're putting together a BD deal or putting together a big thing. Right?
I think that's right. Yeah. Well, and it's that agitation. You have to be okay with people that push you, right? Normal human is I don't want that, or forget them. And you actually, that's where great change comes from. So, that was certainly one of the big things in our decision process.
Got it. I think it'd be really interesting to talk about, had you always been interested in investing in venture capital in the back of your head, or did someone pull you aside and say, hey, we have this opportunity at Greylock? How did that happen?
Yeah, that was two things. One, I was pretty burned out at that point. And so I hadn't been focused on venture. Yeah. I'd been, just running this rat race, the crazy growth and all these things. Everything was new and being made up. It just was pretty burned out. I had 2 young kids at that time. Yeah. And so I knew I needed a change. I had lots of offers to sort of be a CEO or in a small founding team of startups. That was kind of the natural next path. And it just turned out that I had enough self-awareness to know that at that moment in time, like I was so fried that like going and trying to become a CEO and all that required, having seen how that works, you know, it's a great job. It's one of the loneliest jobs, and you have to be willing to give 150% across so many vectors: personal, employee, investor, customers, you know, everything. And I just wasn't there. And so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I actually took some time and helped raise my daughter, and so got, you know, a chance to sort of settle myself and reconnect with the family. And then Anil Bushri was the person that recruited me. Anil is my partner joined 9 months earlier at Greylock and was sort of the anchor player, and now is our head of our enterprise software business, also the CEO of Workday.
And so was Anil sort of brought on with the Boston contingent of Greylock to sort of help build an outpost?
Yeah, there were two individuals that were out here investing sort of like on their own basis, and a partner named Bill Hellman, who was running the firm from the East Coast, came out and helped with them recruit Anil. And Anil was this senior executive at, you know, number 2 guy at PeopleSoft, one of the early guys. And so he was a big advocate for consumer, that we needed to invest in consumer, and we'd invested in DoubleClick, which had been a huge hit in sort of the first phase of consumer. But that was really it, and DoubleClick was really a business to consumer to consumer kind of play, right? Anil started doing some investments in consumer, and he likes to say, you know, he proved that he wasn't a consumer investor, he's an enterprise investor. And when I got hired, I was asked to go and become an enterprise investor when
So how did he find
happened.
you? How did you guys meet each other?
Oh, he and I we knew each other from business school.
Oh, okay.
So we've been at Stanford together.
Got it.
And been reasonably good friends, certainly friends of really close friends.
Yeah.
And when he heard I was sort of in this sort of mode of what's next, he dove in, and I was like, venture capital, really? I'm 32. Like, why would that make sense? And that's an old person's gig. And I was, you know, I was burned out, but I was going to take time and then recharge and go back into operations. And you know, the more I learned about Greylock, it really kind of clicked to me that there was a huge opportunity, and it was a wonderful organization with a great history and culture that matched what I cared about. And you know, Anil, there was a chance to work with a superstar friend that I'd always admired. And you know, another adage I've always believed is, you know, when world-class people go and do interesting things, that's a signal. And so that's actually how I joined Greylock, and it's how I went on the board of the Rockefeller University, which is the first nonprofit. The previous head of research for Genentech had become a close personal friend, a guy I respect at that same kind of level. And when he moved back to run Rockefeller University, I said, okay, that's an interesting thing. He's a world-class, high-quality guy. And when he said, would you come on the board, you know, I'm like, same thing, 32, venture cap. I was like, biotech, university, that doesn't make any time. And again, wonderful institution, high quality folks, and you can't go wrong in life, I think, if you follow those things.
Totally. And so in those early years of Greylock, let's say before, like around the Pandora and before the LinkedIn investment, right? What were those days like? Like, how did you build the team? Like, because I'd imagine to start that, it's a pretty lonely gig, right? If you're just starting up the practice and you kind of have to go develop a thesis or something, right? Or some kind of filter, right? How did you approach those years? Yeah,
well, the first couple of years I was told I should be an enterprise investor, and I went out and proved that I was a bad enterprise investor in the early 2000s. That's probably forgotten. And in 2002, 2003, I basically said, look, you know, it wasn't working. I was either going to get fired or I was going to leave.
And you're into consumer media.
That's what I cared about from the beginning, right? And so I was like, look, this isn't for me. I'll go back into operations and consumer. You know, I appreciate the opportunity. I love the organization, but like, I'm a really bad enterprise investor. And I think Anil and some of the other leadership of the firm at that time said, well, tell us why you think that, you know, consumer is something you'd go put your whole career back into again. We're not going to argue that you're a good enterprise investor, but we'd like to hear this other piece. And so I put together a case that helped explain why I thought consumer was a huge secular trend, but we were in a brutal cyclical downturn. And I framed it in a way that enterprise investors and enterprise company with a history of traditional VCs could understand why it wasn't voodoo and magic. And at those days, the words for consumer were no barriers to entry, tons of competitors, never will be lasting businesses.
Right.
Those were like the kind of, and I tried to frame, well, there are barriers, and here's how brand works, and here's how scale works, and here's how consumer and behavior works, and advertising doesn't work forever, but until you get to a massive scale, and then all of a sudden it works unbelievably well. And so, and they said, well, this is really interesting. Why don't you go and try that? And that was 2003, and that led to investment in LinkedIn, Dig, Facebook, Pandora, hiring of James Slavitt, John Lilly, and Reid Hoffman, and it's great. It's been a great team, and it's so fun to have people around, and the scale, and Josh Ellman, and Sanjay Raman, and Simon Rothman. I mean, it's so much fun to have a team. To your point, back in those days, it was pretty lonely, and I knew Sequoia and Excel, those guys, they had people, so many feet on the street, all with consumer investing background, and I was doing it alone with Greylock's name and little old me and not a lot of history, and it was hard. I knew I couldn't cover. They do 10 times many deals, so I got to take about 1/10 the swings, and I needed to figure out how to have enough success to build an understanding of why this was something to do, and then attract a franchise. And that was really fun. That was the entrepreneurship part of what I was doing. That that same passion about working with companies and creating great things. I got to do a little bit of that in Greylock and partner with Anil, who supported me, which was a big deal. On that side to get there.
And what would you say, like, if you were to look back and say, what are the two biggest, or one or two biggest changes that Greylock made in the time, your day one up until today? What are the two things that have changed, right? Maybe either the size or the way services are delivered, or what would you say are like the biggest things you would never even have conceived of?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the huge changes was we fundamentally changed and have consistently applied a different model for what a VC should be. So our model, which was very different in the past, was young, experienced product people that had gotten to senior levels, but had been in junior, mid, and senior levels in startups that they were going to invest in. So for us, consumer net or enterprise software, and that had been in small companies, hypergrowth, and public companies. And we said, that's the profile. That's the profile. And they have to be smart enough that they can be good investors, and they have to be constant learners. But that's better than the traditional, which was take an MBA and have them work in the firm as an associate and move up. And if you look at it today, every partner in the firm who's investing on the enterprise or the consumer side looks like that. And so you get someone like Anil, PeopleSoft, Reid, LinkedIn. Those are like, today I think myself and maybe Ashim Chandra are the only partners that also haven't been not only that, but founders and CEOs. And so, that's just the right way to help companies, we think, but we also think it provides a way of interacting with companies where you understand what they've been through, you understand how to help, but not across the line to where you understand that they're the ones who are really building the company day in and day out.
And so if we take that sort of first decade shift into more founder, operator, deep product experience that you guys took, if you were to look in your crystal ball, let's say 10 years out and say, here's what I predict could be one of the top 2 or 3, biggest changes that will happen in larger venture firms. What do you envision, or what do you think about? Because you're obviously thinking way further ahead than what's going to happen in 2013.
Well, I think that model doesn't change. I mean, I think it only gets more so. I think we have to balance that with some of the skills of understanding how to be an investor. And so we're, it's one of those things where you're an innovator, you always have to be now working on the next thing, as you're saying. And so we're very focused on what's the next level of balance between all those skills, and can you start to predict that in the hiring. But that we love. We love the culture that creates. And to your point of like how you make the decision on which thing to invest in when it's really hard and no one likes any of it, or it's confusing, that's it for us. The fact that we have people that have been there, that were in those kind of situations, that were building the product right around the consumer with the engineering, like at that moment of inception or at those moments of spark, that's how you go, oh, I believe in this, when other people don't. Because you actually are so close to the experience, you understand it. You can start to see it.
Actually, that leads into the last segment, which I think would be really helpful for sort of, let's say, younger people out there. So I get a lot of people coming to me who are either graduating from college or graduating from business school, and they're interested in venture, right? And it'd be great to hear just your advice for people coming into this new environment, right? Let's 2013 and beyond. And the path you took versus what you've seen happen now, what kind of advice would you give in terms of those people out there on a path to take if they are interested in investing? And then 2, what do you believe helps someone develop intuition around markets and people, right? Because they may have a sense or they may be able to study it, but it'd be great to just hear how you guys think about that.
Before we do that, I would want to say the other thing that I think we're really investing in that we think goes into the future is services that support our entrepreneurs in the same sense. And so, we have an executive recruiting team led by Jeff Markowitz, who is of Hybrid Excels. But we have this really great, what we call the core recruiting team, which is all they do is recruit below VP level engineers, designers, and product managers for our companies. And there's a small handful of them. And they're at the point now where an offer is extended to a candidate that they sourced from one of our portfolio companies every third day, which is stunning when you look at sort of the crunch for talent and the ability to do that and help your companies. And when we talk to companies, they come to us, and if it isn't the first item in the list, it's in the top three, which is, I don't need these really senior, I need engineers, designers, and great product managers.
Because the talent's so fragmented.
So fragmented. And so that's a huge value that we bring. And I think that's making that sophisticated. We've done that with 4 people, right? And it's more efficient than anyone else.
Your own recruiting firm within.
Right, and so how do you do the right ways of doing that? You don't need lots of people. You don't need to do crazy things. You need to get it right so that the effectiveness is incredibly high. And we love sort of, we're operators. We love sort of fixing that and improving it. Anyway, to your point about students and people coming up, it's, I do think engineering and an understanding of engineering and a web development is important now. If I was to do it all over again today, I don't think it'd be okay not to have that. And look, that doesn't mean you need to be necessarily a hardcore CS major from one of the top engineering schools. That'll help. If you can do that, that's great. That's certainly the best. But web development has all kinds of aspects, and design is incredibly valuable, and user experience, design. So I think it can come in lots of different ways. But those skills are important to have. I think another set of skills are sort of understanding business strategy, general, more rounded kind of understanding of businesses. That just does help you in the long run where you want to get to. I think it's a good thing to have in that piece. And then I think the last one is, a passion about products and users and why they use things and what things are great and inspirational. Those are, I think, the building blocks. Then I think you need to be a constant learner, and you just ought to go get experience. Like, I think there's so many stories of if you're good and you have those things, it doesn't really matter where you enter the company. I took a very junior job after business school, right? And a lot of times, actually, you're better off in the long run if you do that, because it allows you, without the experience and the skills, to get exposed to the experience and skills at a great company. Whereas, if you try to take the thing that always maximizes the next choice, then actually you're getting put in worse and worse situations, because those are the only ones that say you're the perfect person to do that with. And so I think there's this counterintuitive nature to saying, go out and get experience. There's nothing like the experience of working in companies. We won't hire folks, and it would never be a path to partner for us to never have worked in the companies. And so, if you just care about investing, quite honestly, you shouldn't be doing what we do. You should go and be an investment banker or a Wall Street analyst or a hedge fund person. Like, for early stage investments in particular, you have to be passionate about product. You have to be passionate about entrepreneurs, change, technology, potential, and you have to have had the experience of doing it, or else I don't think you can really win. And investing isn't really what any of us identify. It's a funny thing. Like, no one at Greylock goes, I'm an investor, or I'm a VC. Like, that actually is something that feels weird to them. What they're all about is they feel like they're product people, they're operators, and they love building companies. They love working with the great new talent to help create great companies like a Facebook, LinkedIn, Pandora, Workday, Palo Alto Networks, the whole list. Those are all companies, and we're doing them from the very beginning. I think probably a third of our companies in sort of the sort of B or beyond stage have been incubated at Greylock, small teams, and so that's what we love to do, and we have that capability. So if you want to go be something like that, then I think you have to go and get experience. Get experience.
Great. Well, David, thanks for coming in and sharing that whole journey.
Oh, it was nice to see you, as always.
Thanks, David.
See you, man. Thanks for the time.